Did you ever wake up to find a red flag waving at you like it had an attitude? Not on your mailbox, not even on your front lawn, but on your boat. Yeah, my boat. I opened the hatch that morning expecting sun, breeze, maybe a seagull with too much confidence, and instead found a paper taped to my mast like a passive-aggressive love letter from bureaucracy. Big, bold letters at the top, mandatory relocation notice, 48 hours. And get this, in papyrus font. That was my first clue this wasn't going to be a normal Tuesday. Apparently, my legally leased slip, my home of 4 years, was now obstructing visual harmony for the good folks of Harbor Wind Estates, the neighborhood that thinks HOA stands for Holy Order of Authority. That's how I met Veronica Griggs, clipboard carrier, former interior designer turned HO warlord, and the self-declared guardian of aesthetic continuity along the waterfront. Leave a comment below and let us know where you're watching from. If you love wild, true-feeling stories packed with twists, justice, and just the right amount of HOA chaos, don't forget to hit that subscribe button. Tomorrow's story is even more jaw-dropping, and trust me, the surprises coming next, you won't want to miss them. Let me back up. My name's Caleb Mercer. I'm 36 years old, semi-retired from tech, after selling a productivity app no one remembers but everyone downloaded for a hot second. I ditched the startup hamster wheel for a 34-foot Catalina sailboat named Second Wind. It wasn't just a name. It was therapy. Peaceful sunrises, coffee on deck, working remotely from a floating office. It was my way of replacing burnout with a breathe. I've been docked at Seabird Marina for 4 years. It's a small family-run place, 37 slips, run by Leo Bain, a Navy vet with the charm of a Southern preacher and the patience of a Buddhist monk. The place is more than a marina, it's a community. You help your neighbor with repairs, you share beer on Saturdays, and the only rules are, don't be a jerk and clean your grill. That was life, until Veronica decided my boat was bad for the neighborhood's chi. Harbor Wind Estates sprang up next door about 15 years ago. Rows of tidy townhouses, manicured walkways, and enough HOA policies to make a lawyer cry. For a while, we coexisted just fine. They had their rules, we had our rum. But 2 months ago, Veronica got herself elected HOA president and promptly began behaving like she'd been crowned queen of the coast. She banned porch flags that weren't HOA-approved colors. She started measuring fence heights with a level. She filed noise complaints about a wind chime. And then she turned her gaze seaward. She decided that Seabird Marina was intruding on community ambiance. And since my boat happened to be docked in the slip closest to the community fishing dock, Second Wind became public enemy 1. I didn't even know I was in a war until she slapped that red notice on my hull and told Leo it was non-negotiable. I called Leo right away. His voice on the phone sounded like someone who'd already been yelled at for refusing to fold. She came down here with her little entourage, he said, talking about community rights and shoreline symmetry. I told her she had no jurisdiction, but she acted like she owned the river. He was right. She didn't own anything but a narrow strip of self-importance. The marina predates the development by nearly 20 years. I've got a valid lease, up to date on payments with 14 months left and an option to renew. Leo confirmed it all. Legally, I was solid. But the red paper wasn't about legality, it was about intimidation. Veronica had been snooping, asking questions about my lease, snapping pictures, and whispering to her board about enforcement strategy. That phrase alone should have sent chills down anyone's spine. When someone uses the word strategy about a man drinking coffee on his boat, you know they've lost the plot. I spent the rest of that morning pulling every document I had, lease, correspondence, receipts, and confirming what I already knew. She had no power here. But the situation didn't sit right. This wasn't just about one boat, it was about control. Veronica had mistaken her HOA badge for a sheriff's star, and was now gunning for anything that didn't bow. And I wasn't about to bow, so I decided to pay her a visit. Not to fight, not to argue, just to make sure she understood the boundaries. Because if there's one thing life on the water teaches you, it's this. If you let the current push you around long enough, you forget you ever had an anchor. and I had no intention of drifting. Not this time. The fine arrived 2 days after the red notice, like it had been sent straight from Queen Veronica's royal court. $850 slapped on my hull in a laminated sleeve like a parking ticket with a superiority complex. The violation? Community aesthetic disturbance. The supporting document included a paragraph about color imbalance and a diagram showing how my sailboat was disrupting the visual flow of the shoreline. According to Veronica's decree, my vessel was a jarring intrusion upon the peaceful symmetry of Harbor Wind Estates. You'd think I'd installed a neon billboard reading, "Fish fear me, ho fears the truth," but no. Second Wind was a white boat with navy trim, the nautical equivalent of beige. The font on the notice? Again, papyrus, which was honestly more offensive than the fine. That clipboard of hers wasn't an instrument, it was a wand of delusion, and Veronica swung it like she thought she could wave me out of existence. It was time to call in a real adult. Joanna Lee, former debate team assassin turned Harvard-educated property attorney, had been my go-to for legal sanity ever since I found out my last landlord tried to sell the building while I was still living in it. I emailed her everything, the notice, the fine, even a picture of Veronica's outfit that day, just for context. Joanna didn't disappoint. She called me 5 minutes later and said, "This is not a violation, Caleb, this is fan fiction with a footer." She explained that the HOA had no legal jurisdiction over the Marina. My lease with Seabird was airtight, my payments were on time, and unless Veronica had unlocked a secret clause in maritime law written in crayon, she had no authority to fine a non-resident. "She's bluffing," Joanna said. "But bluffing works if the other person flinches." She advised me to document every interaction, never raise my voice, and above all, never give Veronica the satisfaction of outrage. So I didn't. I played it cool. Too cool. And that might have been the gasoline on Veronica's little bonfire of entitlement, because by the weekend, things got weird. Really weird. That Saturday, I saw 2 residents from Harbor Wind Estates strolling along the dock, clipboards in hand, snapping photos like they were auditioning for a detective show no one asked for. One of them leaned over to measure the distance between my boat and the shore with a tape measure. I asked if he was with the Coast Guard. He said, "No, I'm with the Visual Preservation Committee." I said, "That's not a real thing," and he said, "It is now." I knew then we were dealing with HOA rulemaking by improv. Veronica wasn't just enforcing policy, she was creating new bureaucracies out of thin air, and the neighborhood, God help 'em, was playing along like extras in her HOA production of Les Miserables, but with more khakis and fewer songs. By Monday, the consequences were no longer metaphorical. I woke up, tried to fire up the coffee pot, nothing. Tried the faucet, dry as a board. Meeting. I checked the panel. My utilities had been cut. I called Leo, who answered on the second ring. "I didn't want to do it," he said, voice heavy, but Veronica came by with 3 other board members, said they'd launch a formal campaign to boycott the Marina if I didn't enforce their standards. He sounded exhausted. "Caleb, I got Carol's treatment bills piling up and cancellations from people scared of the HOA's nonsense. I just need some breathing room." I told him I understood. I really did. Leo was trying to protect the only thing left holding his family together, and I wasn't about to make him the villain in a story he didn't write. But that didn't mean I was going to let Veronica turn my life into a prop for her HOA's psychodrama. If she wanted to play dirty, I'd play smart. And smart was about to get strategic. I spent the afternoon printing copies of my lease, bank statements, HOA documents, and everything Joanna had flagged as useful. Then I walked the dock, nodding at every surveillance volunteer like we were old pals. If they wanted a show, I'd give them front row seats to a man calmly preparing for war, because that's what it had become. Not a dispute, not a misunderstanding, a war over perception, power, and who got to define peace. Veronica saw herself as a lighthouse guiding the community. But lighthouses don't move around taping fines to boats and threatening retirees. They stand still, they shine, and they mind their own business. But she didn't want to shine. She wanted to control the ocean, and if she thought cutting my power would make me float away quietly, she clearly didn't understand the current she was swimming against. This wasn't about the aesthetics of one boat, this was about dignity. And you can't find someone into surrendering that. Keep watching. Because the next move, she's not going to see it coming. So now, I've got no water, no power, and a swarm of HOA minions measuring my boat like they're planning a hostile takeover. But what Veronica doesn't know is, I'm just getting started. If you think clipboard tyranny was bad, wait until you see what happens when she crosses a line. Literally. Trust me. The next move flips the entire game. Hit that subscribe button so you don't miss what's coming next. Because when HOA bullies go too far, sometimes the best revenge is ownership. And if you've ever dealt with a neighbor like Veronica, drop a comment below. I've got a feeling we're not the only ones with a story to tell. Ever tried sleeping on a boat with no power, no water, and the gentle hum of HOA harassment circling your dock like sharks in sweater vests? I spent that night lying in my bunk, lit by a camping lantern in pure disbelief. Every creak of the dock sounded like another clipboard coming to life. No coffee, no charging ports, no working head. It was like living in a floating time machine, specifically the 1800S, but with HOA fines instead of pirates. Morning came with that same eerie stillness you feel before something stupid happens. And sure enough, when I stepped out to stretch, I nearly fell into the water because someone had cut the dock lines. Not frayed, not old, cleanly sliced. The kind of sabotage that tells you, this isn't a misunderstanding, this is a message. And the only reason second wind hadn't drifted into open river was because I'd tied a backup stern line out of habit, a habit that just saved me thousands and maybe my life. I stood there staring at the ends of the rope like they could explain themselves, but they didn't. I checked the hull at fresh scratches, right at the waterline, subtle but deliberate. I climbed back on board and checked the GPS unit and VHF radio. Both tampered. The GPS wiring had been yanked halfway out, like someone thought it was a car stereo, and the radio was hanging by a thread. That's when it clicked. This wasn't petty anymore. This was criminal, and unless a gang of nautical raccoons had developed toolkits and a grudge, I knew exactly where to point the compass. But pointing didn't solve anything. I needed to act. So I filed a police report. Not that it would do much. No cameras, no witnesses, and a perpetrator with a clipboard-shaped cloak of invisibility. But the report was step one. Paper trail. Always leave breadcrumbs when you're walking into a storm. I told Leo what happened, and I could see the blood drain from his face. He didn't say I told you so, because Leo's not that kind of man, but I could feel the weight of guilt pressing on him. We stood in silence for a moment, both of us staring at the Marina like it had turned into a battlefield overnight. They're pushing harder than I thought, he finally said, and I can't hold the line much longer. That's when he told me. Veronica had been asking around about his finances. She knew about Carol's medical bills, knew the Marina was barely breaking even, and had started floating the idea of a community purchase initiative to reclaim the shoreline for HOA purposes. Translation? She was sniffing out a buyout, trying to corner Leo into selling so she could control the docks, the slips, and every piece of water within HOA eyesight. And she wasn't using money to do it, she was using fear. I could see it all forming like storm clouds. Veronica wasn't interested in peace. She was building a legacy, HOA royalty. And Leo, he was just collateral in her campaign for manufactured control. The man who'd built this Marina with his own hands, who nursed it back to life after the 2008 crash, was now being bullied by someone whose greatest contribution to humanity was themed parking enforcement. It was a morality squeeze play. Leo's wife needed treatment that insurance wouldn't cover. The HOA was threatening a smear campaign, and Caleb Mercer was the non-compliant element, putting his business at risk. The trap was almost elegant in its cruelty. And the worst part? Leo wasn't mad at me. He was mad at himself for letting it happen. I don't want to sell, he said, eyes fixed on the water, but I can't let Carol go without treatment. What choice do I have? That question stuck with me like a nail in the shoe, because the answer was ugly. and it wasn't his burden to carry alone. That night, back on my barely functioning boat, I sat by lantern light with a notebook and a long stare. Veronica thought she was winning, thought she'd choked the power, isolated the target, weakened the community. But what she didn't realize was that the pressure she was applying, it was bending something deeper, not just in me, but in the marina itself. In the people who'd watched this place turn into a target. She didn't just bring a clipboard, she brought quiet war, and like any war, it was only a matter of time before someone fought back. I didn't say a word to Leo the next morning. I just smiled, grabbed my files, and made a few calls. Because if Veronica wanted to own the shoreline, I was about to make sure she'd never get close again. The game was about to change. She just didn't know I had the pieces. Not yet. Stick around. The next move doesn't just flip the board, it rewrites the rules. It hit me somewhere between the hum of the lantern and the creak of a dock line still intact. If Veronica wanted control of this marina so badly, why not beat her to it? Not with protest, not with paperwork, but with purchase, the kind that rewrites the power structure with one signature. I didn't need to win her game, I just needed to own the board. So I called Joanna. Told her I had an idea that sounded more like a revenge fantasy than a financial move, but I was serious. I asked what it would take to buy Seabird Marina outright, and whether Leo could even legally sell it on a quick turnaround. She paused. Caleb, if you're asking me if it's possible, yes. If you're asking if it's smart, also yes. But only if you're ready to deal with the fallout of becoming someone's HOA nightmare. I smiled. Joanna, I was already their nightmare. I'm just upgrading my status. To be clear, I didn't make billions in tech. I wasn't one of those Silicon Valley unicorn chasers. I made one app. A silly, overly colorful productivity app that gamified to-do lists with a cartoon parrot who squawked motivational quotes. It took off during the pandemic when people were stuck at home and desperate for something, anything, that felt like progress. A YouTuber mentioned it in passing, and suddenly I had 1 million downloads and licensing offers. I never got rich, but I made enough to live comfortably, invest wisely, and never take another job interview again. I'd stashed most of it in a low-key brokerage account and forgot about it. Until now, when I told Joanna what I could offer, her voice dropped. You could pay cash, she said. That'd be hard for anyone to beat. That was the point. No board votes, no negotiation, no slow drip takeover, just a clean cut and a new title that couldn't be ignored. Buying the marina wasn't revenge. It was reparations. Paid in full. We met Leo that Thursday afternoon in Joanna's office. He looked like a man walking into confession, relieved but unsure if forgiveness was even on the table. I laid it out plain. A full cash offer, quick close, and a signed agreement that kept him on as marina manager with health insurance and a steady salary. I wanted him and Carol to stay, not just because he built this place, but because people like Leo make things worth preserving. When I finished talking, Leo just stared at me for a moment. Then he said, "You sure you want to step into all this?" I nodded. Leo, I've been living in it. Now, I'm just flipping the script. He didn't say anything after that. He just shook my hand like a man letting go of weight he'd been carrying too long. That night, as I walked back to Second Wind, I felt something shift. Not in the air, but in the foundation. The clipboard era was about to meet the age of ownership. The closing happened fast. Within days, I had title to the docks, the land, the slips, the office, and all rights to operations. Joanna handled the filings. Leo told Carol the good news. She cried. The marina wasn't just saved, it was secured. And that's when I made the call. An emergency meeting of all slip renters and tenants. 35 people showed up, most assuming the worst. I stood up on the dock with a folder in hand and a breeze at my back and told them the truth. As of today, I am the new owner of Seabird Marina. All your current leases stay the same, nothing's changing, except one thing. Effective immediately, Harbor Wind Estates, HOA, no longer has special access to our property. The cheer that erupted wasn't polite. It was primal. The sound of people who'd felt powerless getting their dignity back in one announcement. And just as the noise settled, the silence broke again, this time by the rhythmic click of heels on wood. Veronica arrived with 4 HOA board members in tow, striding across the Marina parking lot like she was leading a deposition against gravity itself, red clipboard in hand, jaw tight enough to crack a walnut. "Mr. Mercer," she said, not quite hiding her disgust, "we need to have a discussion about your unauthorized acquisition of this facility." I resisted the urge to laugh. Instead, I opened the folder, pulled out the deed, and handed it to her with the kind of smile usually reserved for lottery winners. She scanned it, blinked twice, then looked up like someone who'd just realized the cruise ship left without her. This isn't how community relations work," she sputtered. "You can't just buy a marina to escape community responsibility." I looked her dead in the eye. "Veronica, I didn't buy the marina to escape anything. I bought it to stop you." The stunned silence that followed was better than any fine, any notice, any red paper threat she'd ever printed. And what comes next? Well, let's just say she wasn't done throwing tantrums, but I was done playing nice. Stick around, because her empire of flyers is about to face its reckoning. And just like that, the marina changed hands, and the balance of power flipped without a single vote. But don't think Veronica walked away quietly. Oh no, the clipboard queen wasn't done. She was just getting desperate. Hit that subscribe button so you don't miss what happens when entitled power meets a deed with teeth. The next chapter? Let's just say it involves picket signs, public meltdowns, and one final play she never saw coming. Stick around, because things are about to get spectacularly ho-oh. Veronica came in hot. You could hear her heels hit the dock before you saw her, like someone trying to stomp authority into the ground one step at a time. She had her red clipboard clutched to her chest like a sacred text, and 4 HOA board members trailing behind her like backup dancers from a very bitter Broadway musical. She stopped 10 feet from me, narrowed her eyes, and declared, without a hint of irony, "This marina ownership transition is illegitimate." I almost thanked her for using the word transition, as if the property had changed genders instead of deeds. I stayed calm, smiled like I'd just received the best customer review ever, and handed her 2 things, a formal trespass notice and a rolled-up copy of the deed. Her fingers tightened around the paper like she wanted to wring it out for answers, but what she really wanted was control, and that train had left the station. On time, with receipt. She tried the usual tactics, legal-sounding gibberish, phrases like community interests and shared asset vision, but she didn't have the jurisdiction, the leverage, or, frankly, the audience anymore. The marina tenants were standing behind me, arms crossed, some already filming. A few boats had their horns ready, just in case we needed a celebratory blast. Veronica looked around and realized something she hadn't anticipated. She was losing her crowd. The HOA board members behind her were starting to shift, side-eyeing each other like they'd just realized their leader was steering the ship straight into an iceberg of public humiliation. I could see it in real time. The slow-motion dethroning of a woman who built her HOA empire out of complaint forms and intimidation. And it was glorious. It wasn't a standoff. It was a correction. I gave her one last courtesy. "You're welcome to visit the marina as a private citizen anytime, but any future attempt to enforce HOA policy here will be treated as trespassing, legally, professionally, and without apology." She blinked hard. That was her tell. The moment the script ran out and she had no more dialogue prepared. Without another word, she turned on her heel and marched back up the dock, her clipboard tucked under her arm like a defeated flag. The cheers that broke out behind me weren't polite. They were earned. Tenants shook my hand. One guy brought over donuts. Another offered to paint over the old HOA fishing signs that Veronica had installed without permission. That afternoon, I posted the new marina policies on the office door and kicked off the 30-day notice period for the HOA's special access to officially expire. It felt like exhaling after years of holding your breath. But if you thought Veronica was done, you don't know clipboard tyrants. The next week, she launched what she called informational pickets at the Marina entrance. She stationed HOA volunteers holding signs that read, "Uncooperative owner ahead and this dock divides communities." My favorite? "Ask about the Marina takeover." I almost printed T-shirts. But here's the kicker. People didn't rally behind her. They laughed. Drivers honked and waved at me. Curious onlookers stopped by the office asking for slips. I gave tours, while HOA protesters glared from the gate like unpaid extras in a daytime soap. And inside Harborwind Estates, the Whisper network went into overdrive. Residents started asking real questions. Why had Veronica spent so much energy chasing one boat? Why was she escalating a conflict that didn't affect HOA property at all? A few brave souls even approached me privately to apologize. And then, the flyers started disappearing. Within days, board members began stepping down. One cited personal schedule conflicts. Another said she didn't sign up for a war over a dock. And that's when I heard the words that confirmed everything was shifting. There's a recall petition going around. Apparently, several residents were done playing cheerleader to Veronica's grudge match. They wanted leadership focused on potholes, not power thrips. HOA politics is like wet concrete. Once it sets, it's hard to fix, but Veronica had stirred it too many times and now it was cracking. I stayed quiet, professional, never rubbed it in, because the truth didn't need my help. It was working on its own timeline. And what came next? Well, let's just say the Queen wasn't quite done swinging. But the crown? That thing was already slipping. Stick around, because the final play is where it all unravels. Day 30 landed on a Saturday. So bright, it felt almost scripted. The water was calm, the sky spotless, and the marina looked cleaner than it had in months. It felt like the place had finally exhaled. Around 9 a.m., Veronica showed up, punctual as ever, with 2 remaining board loyalists and a rental truck. Gone were the chest-out theatrics and clipboard salutes. Today, she looked like someone returning overdue library books. Tired, quiet, and trying not to make eye contact. I watched from the dock as they loaded folding chairs, a metal cooler, some faded HO members-only signs, and a tackle box that hadn't seen fish in years. No yelling, no final speeches, just the slow, resigned exit of a ruler whose kingdom had never really been hers. And yet, even in that moment, I gave her one last act of decency. Because that's what ownership allows. Boundaries, not revenge. I approached her as they hoisted the final piece of gear. "Veronica," I said calmly, handing her a plain white envelope, "this is your formal trespass notice." She started to object, but I held up a hand. "It doesn't apply if you return as a private citizen and customer. You're welcome to enjoy the marina like anyone else, under the same rules, same fees, same respect. But any attempt to enforce HOA policy here again will handle that differently." She didn't argue. She just nodded once, placed the envelope in her bag, and finished loading her things. No more clipboard, no more clipped tone. Just a woman realizing the echo of her voice didn't carry past the edge of her property line anymore. It was, in its own quiet way, the most poetic goodbye she could have given us. And the irony? She thought she was the HOA lighthouse. Turns out she was just the fog we had to get through to see clearly. What happened next wasn't dramatic, it was beautiful. Leo's wife, Carol, began her treatment. The experimental program was working, and with the financial weight lifted, Leo returned to marina life with energy I hadn't seen in years. He started hosting weekend barbecues again, lining up group sailing trips for beginners, and greeting every tenant by name before noon. Word spread quickly that Seabird was no longer under HOA shadow, and we had a waiting list for slips within weeks. Former HOA victims, folks who'd once been fined for having garden flags or mismatched blinds, started showing up asking for dock space. And we welcomed them, not because they were rebels, but because they were relieved. Turns out, peace is contagious when you let go of petty control. I didn't just restore power to my boat. I restored peace to the dock. We updated the facilities, painted over old signage, and renamed the common area Second Wind Commons in honor of the boat that started it all. The fishing zone, once a point of contention, was opened to everyone on a first-come basis. No permits, no committees, just people enjoying the water like human beings. And inside Harbor Wind Estates, the change was real. The recall passed. Veronica was officially voted out, 2-1. Her house hit the market a month later. I heard from a neighbor that she was looking for a quieter community. I wished her well, genuinely. Because when a bully exits stage left, the goal isn't to keep them down. The goal is to keep the space safe. And now it finally was. 6 months later, I got a call from a Marina up the river. The owner had heard what happened and asked if I'd consider consulting. Apparently, he had his own HOA fire to put out. I told him I'd think about it. Because sometimes life hands you a clipboard, and sometimes it hands you the deed. You just have to decide which one you're going to use. Looking back, Veronica's biggest mistake wasn't underestimating my lease or overplaying her board's hand. It was thinking power comes from volume, when real power, the kind that lasts, comes from ownership, restraint, and clarity. And that's the lesson I'll leave you with. Sometimes the best revenge isn't payback, it's peace. And that's how a simple eviction notice taped to a boat turned into a full-blown war, and a victory I never asked for but desperately needed. I didn't just save a slip, I saved a community. I helped a good man protect his family. I exposed how fragile bullies become when you stop playing by their rules. And I proved, without raising my voice, without losing my mind, that ownership isn't just about land or property. It's about claiming your peace, protecting your people, and putting an end to the petty chaos that tries to rule by fear and flyers. In the end, Veronica didn't just lose a fishing spot. She lost the illusion that control equals leadership. And I gained something better than bragging rights. I gained perspective. Sometimes the biggest wins come quietly, in a handshake, in a sunrise over your own dock, in the laughter of a community no longer looking over its shoulder. That's what we built here, not just a marina, but a living reminder that justice doesn't always wear a badge or a suit. Sometimes it wears boat shoes, reads its lease, and knows exactly when to buy the land under the argument. So if this story resonated with you, if you've ever been pushed, cornered, or underestimated, let us know in the comments, because your voice matters, and trust me, you're not alone. If you believe in standing up to bullies the smart way, if you felt even 1 ounce of satisfaction when that clipboard came down for the last time, hit that like button. And if you want more stories just like this, true feeling tales packed with justice, humor, and poetic payback, subscribe to the channel so you never miss what's coming next. The next story? Let's just say it might involve an HOA, a hot tub, and a 94-year-old veteran who's not here for your nonsense. See you then.